Joe Biden held a meeting at the White House. Keir Starmer knows where Russia stands on this. Now, many in Europe have said that Russia is bluffing, and many have been calling for the United States to call Russia's bluff.
Hello, friends. Today we have an incredible release. Better to sit down and listen carefully. Today we will analyze a recent interview with Scott Ritter, where he told us what to expect, when to expect it, and where to run. We will not delay, we are starting. The interview begins with the words of the journalist. On his last breath before leaving office, President Biden allowed Ukraine to use long-range weapons to attack Russia. The time chosen for this is, frankly, interesting. Yataz writes about this and confirms that everything is actually true. More recently, George Soros' son wrote on his social media account, "It's great news that Joe Biden has finally allowed Ukraine to use long-range Western-made weapons to hit Russia. Putin has already given an answer." Our guest is former UN weapons inspector and former Marine Scott Ritter, who recently wrote on his Telegram channel that this is an existential threat to Russia and an extremely important moment in this war. We invited Scott to give his comment. Scott, it's good to see you. And yet, as you think, there are a lot of important moments in this war. Do you think this is one of the most important moments? And why do you think this is an existential threat to Russia's future? The first part of Scott Ritter's speech, friends, listen carefully. Well, let's start with two things. First, this problem has not been identified for the first time at the White House level. If you remember, back on September 13th, Joe Biden held a meeting at the White House where Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, was present. He arrived at the meeting with a certain package of diplomatic documents in his hands. He wanted Biden to sign these documents and give Britain permission, and thus allowed Britain to transfer long-range weapons to Ukraine for deep strikes against Russia. He also wanted the United States to do the same with its ATACMS missiles. A day earlier, on September 12th, Vladimir Putin appeared in front of television cameras and said that if this happened, it would be a declaration of war on Russia. Russia will react accordingly. The United States and Britain will become parties to the conflict. NATO will also become a participant in this conflict. In September, the Russian ambassador to the United Nations made the same statement.
Will be a declaration of war against Russia and will be treated accordingly. That the United States and Great Britain will have become parties to the conflict. NATO will have become a party to the conflict on September 13th.
He said that if such a thing happened, it would be a declaration of war. The Russian ambassador to the United States, Anatoly Antonov, said the same thing. People from the Biden administration called him. They are no longer in the government, but they have the right to vote, they asked. Antonov said, yes. And not only that, the United States will not be able to hide behind the Atlantic Ocean. This war will turn into a nuclear one, and the targets will include the United States. At this point in time, Joe Biden backed off. We were only one signature away from global annihilation. Why did I tell you about this? Because the Russian position has not changed. Nothing has changed. Russia has stated that these missiles cannot be used without careful monitoring by the United States. What targeting is being done by the United States? All aspects of the launch procedures are controlled by the United States. That if these missiles are used against Russian territories, it will be an attack by the United States on Russia. It would be an act of aggression. Russia will take this approach and respond accordingly. The same was said about the French and British Scalp missiles. Oh my God, I forgot. Yes, what is it? Yes, these missiles. So the whole world knows Russia's position on this issue. Again, many in Europe say that Russia is bluffing. Many do not believe that Russia will respond in this way. Before we move on, I can say the following. Russian sources in Moscow close to the ruling circles are not yet convinced that this is not a psychological operation, an information operation conducted by the United States. It was also reported, citing a serious source, about a telephone conversation between Trump and Putin that never happened. They allegedly made this report based on sources from the Trump team. So we have unnamed sources from the Times making such a statement under the guise of an official statement from the US government. And this is just the beginning of the performance, friends. Then the heat begins, quote. Thus, the Russians seem to have now taken a wait-and-see attitude, although the idea that some secret meetings may take place in the Kremlin, where Vladimir Putin asks in confusion, What should we do? How to respond? It sounds absurd. Putin and his entourage have repeatedly stated that if Russia is attacked, it will be regarded as an attack by the United States. The response to this is promised accordingly. Strikes will be carried out not only against targets on the territory of Ukraine, but also against states involved in aggression. Against this background, the statement of one of the high-ranking Russian politicians from the State Duma becomes important. He said that Russia is ready to use weapons that no one in the world has seen so far. According to him, a strike with these weapons can have a catastrophic effect for Kyiv and the whole of Ukraine, in fact, making the country non-functional as a modern state. Although the politician clarified that these are not nuclear weapons, he hinted at the possibility of using means capable of delivering a massive fuel electromagnetic strike or using an electromagnetic pulse. Such technologies can completely disable electronics and paralyze the city. According to him, this decision has already been made, which adds to the seriousness of the situation. If Russia really implements such a scenario, Kyiv has almost no chance of remaining in the same state. However, according to observers, Moscow still does not rule out that this whole situation with long-range weapons of Ukraine may be a psychological operation on the part of Washington. The question of who is really behind the actions remains open. Perhaps the puppeteers working behind the scenes are trying to manipulate events while President Biden is more preoccupied with wine than real decisions. Nevertheless, it is obvious that Ukraine already has long-range weapons. The United States has transferred ATACMS missiles, the United Kingdom has transferred its Storm Shadow missiles, and France has transferred Scalp missiles. And these weapons are already being used against Russian forces, although so far in territories that Ukraine considers its own. These strikes have not yet caused a direct escalation, as they occur in regions like Zaporizhia, Donetsk, or Crimea, where sovereignty remains disputed. However, a strike on Kursk or other undoubtedly Russian regions may become the very frontier after which Russia's position will change. People need to realize that the current situation has serious consequences. The United States and NATO actively trained, equipped and dispatched the Ukrainian forces that entered the Kursk region this year. This is actually a NATO invasion by the hands of Ukraine. Now it seems that the main goal of the United States and NATO is to keep Ukraine in the Kursk region until the inauguration of Donald Trump on January 20th next year. This creates conditions for complicating any peace agreements and de-escalation that Trump could initiate. As a precaution, the United States allegedly limited the use of the provided weapons only to the Kursk region, as if this would be able to deter Russia from decisive action. Russia has made it clear that it considers the strikes on the Kursk region as strikes on its territory, since this is indeed the case. The source I spoke with today said that there is no panic in Moscow. Russians look at what is happening calmly and clearly understand what to do. They are ready to respond, but so far they have refrained from retaliating until Ukraine strikes an obvious blow or the White House officially recognizes that the United States is indeed involved in these attacks. The question arises where this information came from. We know that the Washington Post and the New York Times often publish materials that can be considered as fabrications aimed at discrediting Donald Trump. These publications aim to create tension between Russia, the Trump team, and the White House itself. This is a deliberate attempt to impose a more aggressive policy on Ukraine on Trump, creating artificial circumstances around him and forcing him to make decisions in a crisis. But who is behind this? The White House is in chaos. Joe Biden is obviously no longer able to adequately make difficult decisions. Kamala Harris also does not look like a suitable figure for statements of this level. Perhaps Jake Sullivan or Anthony Blinken will do this, but there is no unity within the Biden administration either. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has previously opposed the supply of long-range weapons to Ukraine, warning of the risks of starting a war that the United States cannot win. But Blinken, on the contrary, insists on continuing to finance and supply weapons, using the still existing capabilities. It can be assumed that the information from the New York Times has become a tool of manipulation. It is likely that the United Kingdom, France, and other NATO allies are reacting to it as if it were reliable data. However, there are already signs that this information could have been falsified. For example, the Financial Times and other publications have deleted their publications on this issue, and leaders such as Macron and Stormer may have based their statements on false information. If this story turns out to be another psychological operation, then the world can survive for another week. But if Ukraine does strike at Russia, as some sources claim, the decision on the Russian response has already been made. Russia will not debate. Its response will be swift and disastrous for both Ukraine and NATO. This will inevitably lead to a global war, possibly a third world war with the use of nuclear weapons. If this scenario is realized, we simply will not live to see Christmas, Hanukkah, or other holidays. Life as we know it will stop. This is a reality that needs to be understood now. And those who dismiss the threat should understand. We are on the verge of events that can change the world forever. Here is the current situation. Pray that this turns out to be just an information operation, which is no different from other fictional stories. We absolutely do not need this threat to become a reality. It seems that Zelensky is ready to sacrifice his country, while risking dragging the whole world into a global conflict. And let's hope that Putin will remain as restrained and competent as he has been in recent years. The end of the second part of the speech. How are you friends there? Are you still sitting? Then we listen further. The journalist asks Scott Ritter the last question. Now let's change the subject. What do you think the Trump administration is planning for the current period? This is a really interesting point. He is already the elected president, but does not yet have executive and legislative powers before the inauguration. What are his actions in relation to Ukraine? Scott Ritter's answer made me think, we're listening. If I could advise Trump, I would suggest that he make it clear. Silence only contributes to escalation and plays into the hands of those who are trying to foment conflict with Russia. Although there are discussions about the constitutionality of the Logan Act, this does not prevent the future president from expressing his policies, emphasizing the gap with the current administration. Biden remains in power, but Trump must make his intentions clear. Trump's policy, according to his statements, is completely opposite to Biden's course towards Ukraine. And, most likely, he has already notified key international players, NATO, Great Britain, France. I would suggest that Trump strengthen his position by directly saying that the United States will not support the current course and will begin withdrawing from the conflict zone on January 20th. NATO, he said, may lose the support of the United States if it continues to drag America into the war. Trump should make it clear to all participants that America is abandoning this war. If he does not do this, all the rhetoric will remain with Biden, and the world risks facing a dangerous escalation up to nuclear war. Thank you for listening to this analysis. Please pray that this whole story turns out to be false. The conflict is absolutely undesirable for anyone right now. Let's hope that we will spend the upcoming holidays in peace, and not in a state of global crisis, concluded Scott. This is the material, friends. I want to express my opinion. To be honest, when I read such materials, I get the feeling that we are living in a Hollywood action movie scenario, where the world is on the verge of disaster, and politicians are competing in the nomination, who will shout louder that he is the main savior of the universe. Thanks, of course, to Scott Ritter for his honesty and sober analysis, but sometimes it seems to me that he speaks with such seriousness, as if he himself is preparing to hide in a bunker with a supply of stew and Tolstoy volumes. Or at least with a couple of bottles of wine in case we do make it to Christmas. To all this is added the news that somewhere someone is already ready to apply something. Some promise mega-secret weapons that will destroy everyone and everything. Others in response say that they have something even cooler. As a result, we get a show where, behind the scenes, some beat their fists in their chests, while others quietly lay bricks. Like in a comedy, everything is gone. The cast is being removed. The client is leaving. Well, while all this is going on, the world is sitting on the couch with popcorn and nervously pressing the update button in the news feed. Seriously, friends, let's hope that this is still some kind of clumsy information operation and not a real plan. And if my humor suddenly seems too caustic to someone, then I apologize. It's all nerves, because when the words nuclear war and Christmas is canceled are heard in the same sentence, it becomes simply impossible to resist sarcasm. I want to thank you for your attention and wish you good health, friends. Also, do not forget to write your opinion about the material. I read everything. See you.